The penthouse was less a home and more a monument to a man who had conquered the world and found it hollow. Julian Croft surveyed his domain from 60 stories above the glittering city, a king on a throne of chrome and glass. The silence was his favorite feature, a sterile, curated quiet that no unauthorized sound dared to penetrate. Below him, the city was a circuit board of light, a system he understood, a game he had won. He was the CEO of Ethelred Innovations, a titan of tech, and his life was a testament to ruthless efficiency. His wife, Alara, was a part of that efficiency. She was beautiful, serene, and, most importantly, silent. A former art historian, she moved through their cavernous living space like a ghost, a whisper of Chanel No. 5 in a world that smelled of ozone and ambition. To Julian, she was his most valuable asset, the perfect, placid surface to his turbulent depths. And now, she was pregnant, carrying his heir, the final jewel in his crown. The baby shower, scheduled for the weekend, was an event he had meticulously planned, not as a celebration of life, but as a strategic display of dynastic continuity for his investors and peers. But lately, a discordant note had crept into the symphony of his perfect life. A scent that was not Alara's, something younger, sharper, cloying, clung to the cashmere of his coats. His nights grew longer, justified by late-stage negotiations and transatlantic calls. The excuses were thin, almost insulting in their lack of effort, but he delivered them with the unassailable confidence of a man who did not expect to be questioned. He saw the flicker of hurt in Alara's eyes, but dismissed it as hormonal, a temporary bug in the system. Alara had felt the shift not as a sudden tremor, but as a slow, creeping chill. The gilded cage had grown colder, the silence heavier. Julian, once merely distant, had become dismissive. He looked at her, but through her, his gaze already on the next acquisition, the next victory. The man she had married, or thought she had married, was being eroded by the billionaire he had become, leaving only a polished, empty shell. She had tried to ignore the signs, telling herself it was the pressure of his work, the stress of their coming child. She had lied to herself because the truth was a chasm she was not yet ready to face. The truth arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered not by a human voice but by the cold, blue light of a laptop screen. Julian had left his computer open on the marble island in the kitchen, a rare slip in his otherwise impenetrable security. He was in the shower, the hiss of water a world away from the silent detonation that was about to occur in her life. An email notification bloomed on the screen, the subject line a single, innocuous word, confirmation. Her hand trembled as she touched the trackpad. It felt like a violation, a trespass into his world, but a stronger, more desperate instinct took over. The email was from a luxury travel concierge. An itinerary, 2 first-class tickets to St. Bart's, a private villa at a resort whose name was synonymous with clandestine romance. Her breath hitched. The travel dates began this Friday and stretched for 10 days. This Friday, the day of their baby shower. Her eyes scanned down, seeking a name, any name that would make this a misunderstanding, a corporate retreat, anything but what she knew it was. And there it was. Passenger 1, Julian Croft. Passenger 2, Chloe Vance. Chloe, his young, ambitious protégé from the marketing department. The source of the sharp, cloying perfume. The pieces of her denial shattered, and the full, hideous picture assembled itself with brutal clarity. It was not just an affair. It was a statement. He was canceling the celebration of their child, of their family, to take a vacation with his mistress. The hiss of the shower stopped. The silence that rushed back and was no longer peaceful. It was a roaring void. In that moment, something inside Alara broke. But as the grief and shock washed over her, something else began to form in its place, something hard and cold and impossibly heavy. The ghost in the penthouse was about to find her voice. Julian emerged from his bedroom suite, wrapped in a thick, monogrammed robe, the scent of expensive soap preceding him. He saw Alara standing by the kitchen island, unnaturally still. "I have some bad news, darling," he said, his tone one of practiced, condescending sympathy. "Something's come up. A crisis with the Zurich office. I have to fly out tonight. We'll have to cancel the baby shower." He did not look at her as he spoke, already moving toward the espresso machine. "We'll reschedule. I'll make it up to you." lies. All of it. The casual, effortless deception was more painful than the betrayal itself. He had not even bothered to craft a good one. He thought her a fool, an object so passive she would simply absorb the disappointment without question. She watched him, this king in his castle of glass, and felt no sorrow, no heartbreak. The emotional circuits had overloaded and gone dark. All that was left was a pure, clarifying rage that burned away the tears before they could form. For a decade, she had been a shadow, her own formidable intellect packed away like old winter clothes. She had willingly dimmed her own light so that his could burn more brightly. She had been the quiet, supportive wife, the perfect hostess, the future mother of his heir. She had played the part so well that he, and even she, had forgotten it was a role. She had forgotten the woman she was before Julian Croft, the prodigy who saw the world not in colors and shapes, but in code and elegant, logical systems. The initial shock was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She retreated to their bedroom, the vast, empty space feeling like a mausoleum for her marriage. She curled up on a chaise lounge, one hand protectively on her stomach, and let the first wave of pain wash through her. She saw her future spooling out before her, the cliché victim, the scorned, pregnant wife, cast aside for a younger model. A pathetic footnote in the grand biography of Julian Croft. She saw it, and she rejected it with every fiber of her being. It was the steady, gentle flutter of the life inside her that anchored her. This was not just about her anymore. It was about the legacy of her child, a legacy Julian was already tarnishing before it had even begun. Her grief, so sharp and overwhelming moments before, began to transmute. The heat of her sorrow cooled, crystallizing into something else. It was resolve, cold, hard, and as unyielding as the diamonds on her finger. A steel her grandmother had always said ran deep in the women of their family had finally been forged in the fire of his betrayal. She stood up, her movements no longer frail but deliberate. She walked to her dressing room, a sanctuary of silk and cashmere he had designed for his doll. But tonight, it felt like an armory. She did not cry. Crying was a luxury she could no longer afford. Instead, she began to plan. He expected her to crumble. He expected her to retreat to her parents' country home, to lick her wounds in private while he sunned himself in the Caribbean. He had profoundly, catastrophically underestimated her. Her mind, dormant for so long, whirred to life. It was a precision instrument, a weapon he had never known she possessed. The plan that began to form was not born of frantic, emotional revenge. It was strategic, it was methodical, and it would be devastating. He wanted to cancel the baby shower? Fine. The party was canceled, but another event would take its place. At the same venue, on the same night. An event of his own making, which she would attend as the guest of honor. She pulled out a dress from the back of her closet, one he had never seen. It was a deep, shimmering emerald green, the color of envy and new beginnings. It was a warrior's gown. She called her best friend, Annalise Page, a woman whose mind was as sharp and merciless as the legal contracts she drafted. Annalise, she said, her voice devoid of any tremor. I need you. Julian is reevaluating his assets. I've decided it's time he learned what I'm truly worth. The chosen venue was Aperture, a restaurant so exclusive it was spoken of in whispers. Carved into the top floor of a modern art museum, its bookings were a matter of legend. Julian had secured it for the baby shower, a flex of his power. The theme was to be a new legacy, with floral arrangements of white orchids and baby's breath symbolizing purity and new life. When Julian's secretary called to cancel, Alara, feigning devastation, had let it happen. But Julian, ever the opportunist, hadn't canceled the venue booking itself. He had simply changed its purpose. His emergency trip to Zurich was, of course, a fiction. Instead, he repurposed the opulent space for a spontaneous networking dinner with a handful of key investors and board members. It was a power play designed to solidify support for his upcoming merger. And by his side, seated in the place of honor meant for his pregnant wife, would be Chloe Vance. He was in his arena, at the absolute zenith of his power, surrounded by his court. On Friday evening, as Julian was holding court, the doors to Aperture slid open. A hush fell over the room. Framed in the entrance was Alara. She was not the meek, subdued woman they knew. She was a vision of avenging royalty. The emerald green dress clung to her, showcasing the proud swell of her pregnancy. Her hair was swept up, her jewels were understated but magnificent, and her eyes held a cold, calm fire that swept over the room and settled on her husband. Her walk across the marble floor was not a walk, it was a procession. Every eye was fixed on her. The air crackled with a sudden, delicious tension. Julian's face, flushed with wine and victory, went pale. He looked as if he had seen a ghost, a beautiful, vengeful ghost clad in emerald silk. He half rose from his chair, his mouth agape. Beside him, Chloe froze, her fork halfway to her lips, the color draining from her cheeks. The power dynamic of the room did not just shift, it inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. Alara did not approach her husband's table directly. She paused beside the central floral arrangement, the same white orchids and baby's breath meant for her shower. She reached out and gently touched a petal. Then she turned to the assembled guests, a small, humorless smile on her lips. "Julian, darling," she began, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "You canceled our baby shower. I was so disappointed. So I was thrilled when I heard you were hosting this lovely dinner instead. The theme is a new legacy, I believe. How fitting." Julian found his voice, a strangled rasp. "Alara, what are you doing here? I told you. I was in Zurich." "Did you?" she replied, her tone one of innocent curiosity. She took a step closer, her gaze sweeping over Chloe, a dismissal so complete it was a physical blow. "That's strange. Because American Express has you in a lovely villa in St. Bart's. Or at least, they did, until your travel was unexpectedly canceled this afternoon." She looked at Marcus Vance, Julian's COO, who was watching with wide, calculating eyes. "Marcus, you were on that Zurich call, weren't you? How was the weather?" The room was a bomb waiting to detonate. Julian was on his feet now, his face a mask of white-hot fury and panic. "This is not the time or the place, Alara." "Oh, I think it is," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet more potent than any shout. "This is the perfect place. A room full of the people whose fortunes are tied to yours. Investors, board members." She let her eyes drift to each of them. "You are all here to celebrate Julian's new legacy. So I thought it was time you understood the foundation upon which that legacy is built." And then came the detonation. It was not a scream or a thrown glass. It was something far more catastrophic. "Most of you know me as Alara Croft," she said, her voice now ringing with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from her. "But years ago, before I ever met my husband, I worked under a different name, a pseudonym. Perhaps the tech investors among you have heard of it." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "My name was Nix." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Nix, the mythical, anonymous coder who had created the Prometheus core, the revolutionary algorithm that was the entire foundation of Ethelred Innovations. The very software Julian had built his billion-dollar empire upon. Nix was a legend, a ghost in the machine whose identity had been the subject of speculation for a decade. And she was standing here, in an emerald dress, pregnant with the child of the man who had just tried to discard her. Julian stared at her, his mind unable to process the information. It was impossible. A trick. A lie. But he saw the truth in her cold, unwavering eyes. The woman he had treated as a beautiful, simple-minded accessory was the architect of his entire existence. Alara delivered the final, fatal blow. "I am the sole patent holder for the Prometheus core. I sold Ethelred an exclusive license, which, according to the key person provision in Clause 11b of the contract, becomes null and void in the event of, well, let's call it a fundamental breach of good faith." She gave a serene smile to the horrified investors. "I'm sure my lawyer, Annalise Page, will be happy to forward you all a copy." Shatter. The illusion of Julian Croft, tech visionary and master of the universe, was annihilated. He was not a king. He was a fraud, a man who had built his castle on a foundation he never knew he didn't own, a foundation that was now walking out the door. With a final, regal nod, Alara turned. She did not look back. She did not run. She walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind the smoldering wreckage of her husband's life. The entire room watched her go, their fortunes evaporating with every step she took. Julian Croft was left standing alone amidst the white orchids, a fallen king in a ruined palace. The fallout was not a slow burn, it was an inferno. Before Alera's car had even reached the sanctuary of Annalise's apartment, the story was already a wildfire tearing through the digital world. It started with frantic texts between the dinner guests, then blossomed onto gossip blogs with headlines like "Billionaire's Baby Shower Brawl," but within an hour, it hit the serious financial news networks. The narrative was no longer about a marital spat. It was about the fundamental instability of Ethelred innovations. Julian Croft was instantly reframed, his carefully constructed image of a tech titan replaced with that of a fool, a philanderer, and worse, a man who did not understand his own company. By the time the markets opened in Asia, the damage was catastrophic. The revelation that the Prometheus core, the company's crown jewel, was controlled by his estranged and publicly humiliated wife created a panic of historic proportions. The key person provision she had cited was a poison pill of such exquisite design that it sent a tsunami of fear through their shareholders. The stock didn't just dip, it plummeted off a cliff. Billions in market value were wiped out in a matter of minutes. The merger he had been so proud of was dead on arrival, its backers citing the character clause in their agreement. Julian watched the collapse from his penthouse, the city lights below now seeming to mock him. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from his board, his PR team, his lawyers, a chorus of panic he could not bring himself to answer. He was paralyzed, trapped in the wreckage of the life he had built, haunted by the calm, authoritative voice of the woman he thought he knew. He had seen her as a beautiful piece of art. It turned out she was the architect of the entire museum. And then, the viper struck. Marcus Vance, his loyal COO, the man he had trusted for 15 years, called for an emergency board meeting. He didn't call Julian. He called the other board members. With the company in freefall and Julian's reputation in ashes, Marcus made his move. He presented himself as the voice of stability, the steady hand needed to navigate the crisis. He painted Julian as a reckless liability whose personal failings had endangered them all. The mistress, Chloe, was revealed for what she was, a co-conspirator, a honey trap who had been feeding information to Marcus for months. The vote of no confidence was unanimous. By noon, Julian Croft was exiled from his own kingdom, locked out of the company he had built. Stripped of his power, his reputation, and his wife, Julian became a ghost in his own gilded cage. The sterile silence of the penthouse was no longer a comfort. It was a suffocating shroud. He was a king in exile, wandering the vast, empty rooms that echoed with his failure. For the first time in his adult life, he was utterly alone, forced to confront the hollow man staring back at him from the polished marble walls. The shield of his wealth and power was gone, and he had no idea who he was without it. He was forced to look inward, to the deep-seated fears and insecurities planted by a domineering father who had always told him he would amount to nothing without a brutal, unyielding will. He had spent his life proving that man wrong, only to become a crueler version of him. While Julian's world imploded, Alera executed a strategic retreat. She didn't flee to a glamorous hotel or a lavish family estate. She went to Annalise's modest but comfortable two-bedroom apartment in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It was a world away from the cold minimalism of the penthouse. It was a space filled with books, warm light, and the scent of coffee. It was real. Here, surrounded by the fierce loyalty of her friend, Alera breathed for the first time in a decade. This humble apartment represented her true self, a self she had locked away to fit into Julian's world. From this quiet command center, the secret weapon was fully unsheathed. Alera, the ghost in Julian's machine, was about to become its master. Her identity as Nyx was now public knowledge, a fact that had thrown the entire tech industry into chaos. She was no longer just the scorned wife. She was the most sought-after and mysterious figure in modern technology, suddenly returned from the wilderness. Offers poured in. Interviews, book deals, board positions, venture capital funds willing to back any project she could dream up. But Alera had no interest in building a new empire from scratch. Her objective was more specific, more personal. It was about reclaiming the legacy that was rightfully hers and securing it for her unborn child. Working with Annalise, she began a deep dive into Ethelred's corporate structure, a world she understood with an intimacy no one could have predicted. Her code, the Prometheus core, was woven into every aspect of the company. She knew its strengths, its weaknesses, and its secrets because she had built them. It was during this forensic analysis that she discovered the true depth of the conspiracy. Buried in server logs and encrypted messages was a trail leading directly from Chloe Vance to Marcus. It was not just a simple corporate coup born of opportunity. It had been a long, calculated plot. Marcus had groomed Chloe, using her ambition to get close to Julian, feeding him bad advice, isolating him from honest counsel, and setting him up for a fall. The trip to St. Bart's was not Julian's idea alone. It was a carefully laid trap, designed by Marcus to detonate at the most damaging possible moment. This discovery presented Alara with an impossible choice. She had the proof to destroy Marcus Vance utterly. But in doing so, she would be saving the empire of the man who had broken her heart. It reframed Julian, not as an innocent, but as both a villain and a victim, a puppet in a much larger play. She could let his company, his legacy, burn to the ground under Marcus's corrupt leadership. Or she could intervene, not for Julian's sake, but for the sake of the child who carried his name. The child who was half Croft, half Nix. After a week of silence, she made a call. Julian, holed up in his penthouse, a man hollowed out by despair, was shocked to see her name on his screen. He answered, his voice a broken whisper. Alara. Julian, she said, her tone cool and professional, devoid of either anger or pity. We have a mutual problem. His name is Marcus Vance. I have proof of his conspiracy against you. Against us. A flicker of the old Julian, the corporate gladiator, sparked to life. What do you want? He asked, suspicion lacing his tone. I am not interested in saving you, she stated plainly, cutting him off before he could begin to hope. I am interested in securing my asset and my child's legacy. I am going to destroy Marcus and take control of the board. You can either be an ally in that fight, or you can be collateral damage. The choice is yours. A fragile alliance was forged, not in the cold opulence of his penthouse, but in the warm, book-lined living room of Annalise's apartment. It was her turf. Julian arrived, looking smaller, diminished, a king without a crown. He was no longer giving orders. He was taking them. He sat across from Alara and Annalise, the two women now running the war room, and for the first time, he listened. He provided the insider knowledge of the board's personalities, their fears, their loyalties. Alara provided the irrefutable evidence, the digital smoking gun. It was a business arrangement, a partnership of necessity, not a romantic reunion. The final showdown was not in a restaurant, but in the sterile, airless boardroom of Ethelred Innovations. Marcus Vance, sitting at the head of the table, was confident, triumphant. He was moments away from being named permanent CEO. He believed he had won. Then the door opened, and Alara walked in, flanked by Annalise and a humbled, silent Julian. Her presence sent a shock wave through the room. Mr. Vance, Alara began, her voice calm and clear. I believe you are in my chair. What followed was a masterclass in corporate warfare. Alara didn't shout or accuse. She calmly and methodically presented her case. She projected the encrypted emails between Marcus and Chloe onto the main screen. She played audio recordings Chloe had secretly made of Marcus, detailing his entire plan to defraud the company. She laid out the financial data trails, showing how he had manipulated stocks in anticipation of the collapse. It was overwhelming. It was undeniable. By the end of her presentation, Marcus Vance was ashen-faced. His reign over before it had even begun. The board, terrified of shareholder lawsuits and their own complicity, turned on him instantly. He was fired, with security waiting to escort him from the building and into the custody of federal agents Annalise had already notified. In the ensuing chaos, Alara made her final move. She did not ask for Julian to be reinstated as CEO. Instead, with the full backing of the shell-shocked board, she had herself appointed as the new, permanent chairwoman of the board of directors. The power dynamic was now officially and permanently inverted. Julian was offered a diminished, advisory role, a position contingent entirely on her goodwill. The queen had not just checkmated the king. She had taken control of the entire board. 3 months later, Alara gave birth. It was not a king's heir who arrived, but a queen's. A daughter. Julian was there, not as the proud patriarch, but as a quiet, terrified, and profoundly humbled observer. He stood in the corner of the hospital room, watching Alara hold their child, and saw not an asset or a legacy, but a universe of pure, terrifying love. The birth of his daughter felt like the death of the man he had been, and the first, fragile breath of a new one. A year passed. The new equilibrium settled into a quiet rhythm. They did not reconcile. They lived in separate, more modest homes. Alara ran the company with a steady, brilliant hand, steering it to new heights of success and ethical responsibility. Julian, working his way back from nothing, had started a small foundation focused on mentoring young tech entrepreneurs, teaching them the lessons he had learned in the crucible of his own failure. His visits with his daughter were the center of his life. He would show up not with extravagant gifts, but with groceries. He would fix a leaky faucet in Alara's kitchen. The silence between them was no longer accusatory or cold. It was comfortable, a space of shared history and unspoken understanding. One evening, as he was about to leave, he paused at the door. "Alara," he said, his voice earnest, "I know I can never earn your forgiveness. That's not what I'm trying to do anymore. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to earn your respect, and to be a father our daughter can be proud of." Alara looked at him, the man who had been her husband, her tormentor, and her unlikely ally. She saw the truth of his words in his eyes. She gave a small, genuine smile. "That's a good place to start, Julian." It was not a promise of reunion, but it was a promise of peace. A fragile hope for a new kind of future, built not on power and lies, but on humility and hard-won truth. This story teaches us a profound lesson about the nature of true power and the path to redemption. It shows that strength is not found in controlling others, but in controlling oneself. True power isn't a title or a bank account. It is the quiet, unshakable authority that comes from knowing your own worth, especially when others have made you forget it. Redemption, in turn, is not about getting back what you lost. It is about the painful but necessary process of becoming someone worthy of having it in the first place. It's the journey from a king who demands respect to a man who finally understands how to earn it.